Welcome. In this video, we will explore the essential aspects of a JavaScript style guide. A style guide helps to elevate your code quality through consistent formatting, well-defined naming conventions, clear documentation standards, and effective team practices. This is essential to write maintainable and scalable JavaScript code. Let's delve into code formatting rules, starting with indentation and spacing. It is highly recommended to use 2 spaces for indentation to improve the readability of your code. As you can see in the example, the code is properly indented. Moving on to line length and breaking, it's best to limit each line to a maximum of 80 characters. This is a good practice for better readability, especially on smaller screens. If a line exceeds this length, it should be broken down into multiple lines. In the example shown, the bad code shows a long line of code which is hard to read, and the good code shows how to break the long line into multiple lines. Continuing with code formatting rules, let's discuss brackets and blocks. It's a good practice to always use curly braces, even for single-line statements. This makes the code consistent and easier to maintain. Also, when using object literals, ensure that there is a proper spacing between the keys and values. Now let's talk about semicolons and commas. Always use semicolons at the end of statements. For multi-line arrays and objects, use trailing commas. These practices will improve code readability and prevent potential issues. Moving on to naming conventions, let's start with variable names. It's essential to use camel case for variables. Always ensure your variable names are descriptive and meaningful, making the code easier to understand. When working with arrays, use plural nouns. For example, active users instead of user or color schemes instead of color. When naming functions, use a verb plus noun pattern and be specific about the action. For example, use validate user instead of data and calculate total instead of user. For event handlers, use names like handle submit and on user update. Using proper naming conventions is very important for your code. Now let's discuss naming conventions for classes and constants. For class names, use Pascal case where each word starts with an uppercase letter. Also, class names should be nouns or noun phrases. For example, use user account instead of user account and data service instead of data_service. When naming constants, use all uppercase letters with underscores to separate words. It's good practice to group related constants together. For example, you could have API key and max items and group the HTTP status codes into an object as shown. Good documentation is key to maintainable code. When writing code comments, focus on explaining why rather than what. Provide context and the purpose behind the code. Avoid comments that state the obvious. For complex logic, explain the steps in the reasoning. JSDoc is very useful for documenting functions and classes. Use JSDoc comments to define the parameters, types, and return values of your functions. You can also use JSDoc for describing the purpose of classes. As you can see in the example, each parameter type and return value is documented. A well-structured README file is important for your project. Essential sections should include the project name, an overview, installation instructions, quick start guide, configuration details, contribution guidelines, and the license details. These will help new contributors to quickly understand your project. Now let's talk about the API documentation. Clear API documentation is crucial, including endpoint URLs, HTTP methods, request and response formats, authentication requirements, rate-limiting details, and error codes with their corresponding handling. The API documentation helps developers to use your code. Moving on to team practices, let's focus on code reviews. A thorough code review helps in improving the quality of your code. During code reviews, check for the compliance with coding standards, identify potential security vulnerabilities, ensure proper error handling, look for performance optimizations, validate test coverage, and review any documentation updates. These practices make your code more robust and maintainable. When leaving comments in code reviews, make them specific and constructive. Focus on improvement. Avoid negative or generic feedback. For example, instead of saying this code is bad, suggest a specific change such as using array.map instead of a for loop, or catching specific error types instead of a generic one. Let's delve into version control guidelines, which are important for team collaboration. Adopt a branching strategy such as main, develop, feature, bug fix, release, and hotfix. These branches help in tracking the progress and changes to your code. Always write clear and concise commit messages using a conventional format. Start with a type such as feat, fix, refactor, or docs, followed by a brief description of the changes. This makes it easy to understand the changes made in each commit. To enforce the code style, you can use tools like ESLint and Prettier. ESLint is useful for identifying problematic patterns in your code. It helps maintain a consistent style, preventing bugs and enhancing code quality. You can customize rules as per your needs, such as avoiding unused variables and console logs. It can also enforce the use of curly braces. Prettier is used for automated code formatting, ensuring code is formatted consistently across the team. You can configure various formatting rules such as the print width, tab width, use of semicolons, single quotes, trailing commas, bracket spacing, and arrow parentheses. These tools improve code consistency and readability. If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit codelucky.com for more such useful content.